Welcome, everybody, to this short case study about the NFL playoffs brought to you by Sports Wagering University. My name is Chris R. Farley, and I'm here with Ron, a longtime college football and pro football expert. In my case, I just had a fortunate circumstance of events. My buddy and I went in on the Circa Sports contest. You guys might have seen this if you follow me on Twitter, and we placed in 5th overall in the Circa Sports Million. So really a dream come true there, and feel very grateful for how the season panned out. You can follow me at Chris R. Farley 1 on Twitter, or if you look up Farley Bets, that should come up as well. You can follow Ron at Ron Ace Sports. So Ron, we are here to talk about these here NFL playoffs after another wild year in the NFL. Let me just start off by asking you this. Did these playoffs end up the way that you thought they would with the teams you thought that you would that would actually be in these playoffs, or because these are some very interesting matchups in the wild card round?
Well, until Carson Wentz was in COVID protocol, I figured Indianapolis was absolutely guaranteed to be in, and his performance fell off completely the last 2 weeks. And that's been a predictable theme with people who have come down with even mild symptoms. And it really opened the door to a lot of teams. In the end, I still was surprised that Pittsburgh made it. I thought they'd be flat after that emotional home game for Big Ben, and they found a way. Somehow everything aligned. And then the last game of the season was unbelievable in terms of 70th minute of the game, a field goal goes through and the Chargers are out. So incredibly unpredictable. And on the other side of the coin, pretty much Francisco had a 50-50 chance. New Orleans had a 50-50 chance. And it didn't surprise me. I think the only surprise I would have is how Philadelphia turned the switch. We could talk about that later on, and how they started understanding their own team and got to the point where they deserved to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. My friend Steve, who's a huge Eagles fan who I entered Circa with, I could tell you all about that journey. But the Eagles have definitely found an identity, which I think has been a big aid in the reason why they are in the playoffs, like you mentioned, Ron. I'll say for me, the fact that the Raiders were in there, I mean, that was an unbelievable game to end the season. I was on the Chargers, and kudos to a lot of folks out there who took the Raiders. I know many in Circa took them too at +3. I mean, it is a good line on a home dog, right? With everything on the line, motivation was high. The Chargers, I think highly of the Chargers, and I guess I should say I think highly of Justin Herbert and their potential. Some of the coaching decisions there were questionable at the end, and I was going into it still thinking pretty highly about Brandon Staley, but I'm starting to question that now a little bit. But let's start off with this general playoff discussion, Ron. Is there any particular way that you change the way you develop your power ratings or your, prepare for these playoff games? Like how do you adjust from the regular season to the playoffs?
It's always an interesting discussion. How does one use power ratings? And pretty much I use them as guidelines in the playoffs and in the regular season. If a line is within a point or two of my power ratings, that doesn't sway me at all. It has to be 2.5 points or more in the NFL off. And then I look at it and say, am I wrong? Is the line wrong? And if I can't come up with anything, then that's a play for me if the line is considerably off. And I keep that in mind in the playoffs. But home field advantage is a tricky thing too. So before I get into some of the things I'm looking at, a discussion of home field advantage is also interesting because it used to be, for me, even 2 years ago, 2.5 points for home field advantage, never a full 3. But on Monday night, it used to be 3. And in the playoffs, I used to add a 0.5 point, especially for rested teams, and I made it 3. Then in 2020, with all the COVID issues and no fans in the stands, we dropped it down to 2. This year, I was using 1.5 and 1 as home field advantage, literally down to 1 until the cold weather games. So I want to ask you this question right off the bat. What do you think of home field advantage? Because off the top of my head, I'm looking at a number 2 that I'm going to use.
Yeah, it's such a tough question too, because I would incorporate some weather elements in that too. You think of a place like Buffalo or Green Bay, so maybe the home field advantage, especially for those dome teams coming in. or maybe those West Coast or Southern teams, maybe it makes a bigger difference, right? I mean, we see the weather play a factor almost every year in some matchups. Like the Patriots go down to Miami, and they always struggle. It's like it's crazy how predictable that's been. Even the Tom Brady Patriots, right? So we got to. I thought that they might struggle again on Sunday, and they did. So weather's a consideration for me too, especially at this time of the year as it becomes a little bit more tumultuous. Those winter conditions can really have an effect on the game. And then there's already a disparity for me between individual teams' home field advantage and others. I mean, look at a line like the Steelers and the Chiefs right off the bat, and you got to figure home field has to play into that line a little bit. I mean, it's for a playoff game in the first round at 12.5 or to 13 in some books. Still, that's a huge line for the first round of playoffs, especially with a team like the Steelers who, people can say what they want about the Steelers. It's almost always ugly, but they found a way. And now Big Ben's career goes on. So yeah, for me, Ron, I'm about at a 2, like probably on like average throughout the playoffs. So what we're discussing here for those who don't know is how we adjust our power ratings or our evaluation of home field advantage. It's absolutely gone down, and I haven't incorporated it as strongly in the past as I have this year during the regular season. But you do have to think too that a playoff atmosphere is exponentially different than a regular season atmosphere, especially when you're going to see a game like the Patriots at the Bills this weekend. It's already a rivalry, right? It's, the two teams that beat each other once during the regular season in 2 games that looked very different. And Buffalo is just going to be going nuts. I mean, that place is going to be raucous. And I don't think that's going to stir Bill Belichick very much, and it might not even stir Mac Jones by what we've seen from him. But there's certainly a home field advantage to that one. And I don't know if that's being incorporated correctly there into that line, but that's something we could talk about too. So you're at about a 1.5. I'm about a 2. So it sounds like we're both probably. I'm probably still a little bit lower than I have been in the past, but I could see it going up as the playoffs go on too.
Yeah, I sort of want to use 2. And there's 2 other situations. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of 2 other situations that are going to come into play. You've got Cincinnati hosting a home field game. How does that feel for them, a team that's been out of the playoffs for so long? That atmosphere is going to be incredible. You have Arizona in the playoffs, but they're going on the road, and they haven't been in the playoffs. You've got teams that there's 3 or 4 teams that come off overtime games on week 18. And that means they played extra time. And now you have Saturday games, you have Sunday games, and now we have a new factor, a Monday game. So there's a lot of moving parts to setting home field advantage. And it's something we all need to kind of juggle as we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could tell you just right off the bat, a line that kind of stood out to me was the Raiders and the Bengals. The Bengals with that first time or not the first time, but first time in a long time that they're hosting a playoff game at home. So you're talking about that, right? The difference in the amount of time that these teams get to prep. I mean, Raiders coming off that Sunday night game, intense game, intense finish. And now they have a short week and they have to go to Cincinnati. That's a really tough spot for the Raiders, who have been through a tremendous amount of adversity already this year off the field, especially. And they found a way to squeak into the playoffs. And now they go to Cincinnati facing a very confident Joe Burrow, who, had a week off, which, people have a lot of opinions about that. But I think in Joe Burrow's case, it was really needed, with his nagging injury concerns. So I just, if the Bengals are going to have a shot to win a playoff game for the first time in a long time, I think this is a really good, it's a better spot for them coming off a pretty meaningless game last week where they actually had great effort from their B team there on the field for a lot of it. But I think Joe Burrow comes into this one on fire. So that's one that I'm looking at a little bit early. The line is about right, but I would have to give that advantage because of home field and because of the shorter rest and excitement from the Raiders, from the Raiders game on Sunday night. Is there?
I would have agreement with that.
Yeah. Are there any games that stand out to you?
Yep, there are a couple of games that stand out to me. I missed the line on the Dallas game, 49ers. According to my numbers, I have the line a couple of points higher. So I'm trying to read into why that line is. And the 49ers are a puzzling team to me because they're kind of, if you group them as contenders, pretenders, and somewhere in the middle, the 49ers, I think, can knock off any of these teams. But at any point, they're so vulnerable that they could, every once in a while, they allow 31, 34. And you got Dallas, the highest scoring team in the league, and haven't put together too many bad games. I'm just a little surprised that line came out really sitting at 3 right now for the most part. And I would have thought 5.5. And I would have thought, in fact, that Dallas would have had a little bit more public action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I expect that to probably be pushed up by the time of kickoff a little bit, at least. Because definitely a more public team than the 49ers. That's one that I've been looking at too, Ron, and it's puzzling me a little bit because, like you said, the 49ers are kind of like the Spurs to me. I'm probably most known for my NBA handicapping. And the Spurs are a team that I consistently cannot figure out, from game to game. And that's how the 49ers have been for me almost all year. Their potential is through the roof for the amount of talent that they have. I mean, on paper, but they just don't amount to it very often. But I will say they really impressed me on Sunday. I mean, down 17-0, then they got the field goal before the half. And Garoppolo came right out there and they scored 2 touchdowns in the first 2 possessions, caused the turnover. They were right back into that game. I mean, you do see that kind of answer from really good teams who have a depth of experience. I think Garoppolo is kind of moving into that category for me a little bit. He has great poise, and he's not always the best decision maker, in those irregular season games, but it seems like in those tough moments, he doesn't get very affected by it. Whereas the Rams really have to be questioning themselves after that loss. I mean, that's a really tough loss. So I kind of like the momentum for the 49ers coming into this one. And I also don't like what I've seen from the Cowboys to end the season. I mean, Dak is somebody who's so puzzling to me too, because he, ever since that injury, a little before the midway point of the season, he's been different, and like it looked like his confidence was shaken a little bit or something, like back to the same kind of rigmarole of getting through an injured season. So that's a really tough game to handicap. I agree with you, Ron.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting games for sure on the schedule. Wanted to get back to and talk a little bit about some of the things that I look for as I'm handicapping the playoffs. And there's about 4 or 5 of them. Some of the key metrics to me for playoff indicators is the sack differential. How many times did they get to a quarterback? How many times did their quarterback get sacked? Tennessee, for example, had 19 sacks a year ago, and now they have 44 or 43. So they've over doubled the amount of sacks that they've had. They put more pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They have a really good coach. It's something that I take as they fixed a problem, and that's why they were in contention and somehow got the number 1 playoff seeding. Of the 14 teams that are left, they have my 12th highest power rating. So it's a little strange to say that. I know they're getting Derrick Henry back, and that's going to bounce them a little bit, fresh legs. But they're not a typical number 1 seed by any means. The other metric that's worked pretty well is how well they defend the pass. Now, things have changed a little bit because there's a lot of dink and dunks and RPOs and rules favoring quarterbacks not getting hit, so you don't rush at them as fast and furious as in the past. But if you got a pass defense like Buffalo at 56% or New England at 59%, those numbers out when it comes to these cold weather games, and they could force quarterbacks to throw with really tight press coverage. That's another one I'm looking at. The other thing I'm looking at is improved in-season performance. So you look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Day 1, week 1 of this season, they started 5 new offensive linemen. I mean, that's impossible. 3 of them had never taken a snap in the NFL. 2 rookies, 1 a 6th-round draft choice, and somebody who was also sort of a rookie because he opted out in 2020. 5 new guys. Most of us knew that they would struggle. They were 4-4, and at that point, I thought they'd for sure win the division because they would be getting it. And their turnover ratio was -11 after 8 games, and now it's +4. So there was an obvious thinking that they would be turning it around. Another example were the Philadelphia Eagles, team that ran 22 times per game the first 6 games of the year, had their mini bye. And my writing always talks about how the mini bye and the full bye is so important for new coaches. The later it is, the worse it is, because then they don't have time to adjust. They've run the ball 39 times per game since week 6 after 22 games. It's an amazing turnaround. A team that I couldn't figure out whatsoever the first 6 weeks, they found an identity, and now I know at least who they are, and I can handicap them a little bit better. And the only other thing I'd probably mention is, how much do I look at head-to-head performance? The 2 games New England played against Buffalo. A few weeks ago, Kansas City dismantled Pittsburgh 36-10. What are my takeaways from that? Is that going to repeat? Those are the key factors that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I really like those. So I can mention 2 things that I always like to look at. One is just coaching and quarterback experience. It's a tough thing to handicap and measure at times, but especially in recent history, how have particular coaches and quarterbacks performed when they were under a ton of pressure? I mentioned Jimmy Garoppolo last week. I mean, your back's against the wall. You're down 17-0. You lose, you go home. So that, I mean, it informed me. It doesn't finish the statement for me on Jimmy Garoppolo. We'll see. But but that was impressive, right? And you see a team, obviously, I mean, we could talk about Tom Brady for hours on end and what he does expertly. But you look at a guy like that and Tom Brady, who now brings a coach who has even more experience with Bruce Arians, going against a second-year coach in Sirianni with the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, this is a big spot for him. And that's a big line, right? That's a big line in that game already at -8.5. So yeah. I do think, obviously, history doesn't always repeat itself. So things are going to change and new teams are going to appear at the top. But, usually you can count, there are certain coaches and quarterbacks that you can count on to step up in high pressure moments. And when you see these lines here that are so close, you got to figure they're going to face a lot of those moments, especially in a game like the Patriots and Bills. Like we'll see how poised Mac Jones actually is, because he's about to get a big taste of that.
Yeah.
Another thing I look at too, to your point about the passing game, I really like to look at rushing offense and rushing defense as well, because if you're a playoff team and if you can establish the run, that's going to take up so much. It's going to just take away so much pressure from your quarterback. A team like the Tennessee Titans have been so incredibly impressive. They are still the first place team in the NFL in rushes per game, and they're extremely good in rush defense as well. So even without Derrick Henry for many weeks, that offensive line kept on moving the ball for them. Obviously their offense was a little pedestrian, Tannehill not putting up a lot of numbers, but he got the job done. And they were still rushing for over 100 yards in almost every game after Derrick Henry, and they can stop the run too. So if they, the Titans can make you a singular team and they can control the ball on offense, that's a huge advantage. I mean, in my power ratings too, Ron, they're barely cracking the top 10. They're about a number 9. I mean, I can get them at 9 if I, move some things around. But the Titans are they have these intangibles in place with their culture and how Vrabel is. And the way they kind of play dirty football really well, and the way that they can run down your throat, they just remind me of like a Georgia, Alabama of the NFL. They're going to bring it in a very blue collar way. So I can see the Titans continuing to surprise us. We'll see if a team like Kansas City has to come to Tennessee. That is, we've seen that before, but that is going to be one heck of a matchup. So those are just a few things in addition to what you mentioned that I also look for. I know the running game isn't quite as prominent these days, but when you're in the trenches in these playoff games and the crowd is going wild and you need 1 or 2 yards, right? Sometimes those are the deciding factors in a game if you can move that line.
Well, to that point, running doesn't necessarily get you in the playoffs, but in the playoffs, running matters. So yes. I agree with you completely. There's a lot of running teams that either run the ball well or can't stop the run that are in the playoffs right now. But if they can run it come playoff time, and we've seen some teams flip the switch, then it does matter in the playoffs. I don't want to dismiss it completely, but you have to be able to stop the pass. We saw, for example, the Raiders and the Chargers. Herbert's percentage wasn't very good, but the Raiders couldn't get off the field on 4th downs, 5 in a row. I think at some point you're going to face a drive, a 2-minute drill. Is your quarterback good enough to complete those passes? Is your defense good enough to stop the pass?
Yes, absolutely right. Especially in those big moments as the game comes down to those final moments, Ron. That's obviously it's a huge part of these playoff games. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on from the games that we're about to see, or just in your
Yeah.
preparation?
I guess touch on one or two points in a couple of the games. For example, uh, Arizona, I don't think they're going to be afraid to go on the road to place the Rams. Arizona, what were they, 8-1 on the road?
I believe
They've
so.
seen
Yeah.
the Rams twice. For the Rams, they've got to figure out what's going on with Matt Stafford. 8 interceptions his last 4 games. Either he's going to win the game or they lose the game, because I really don't think, even though Arizona hasn't been in the playoffs, that they're going to be intimidated. I think people who back the Cardinals are going to look at the fact that if you told them that they were going to win 11 games at the start of the year, they'd be thrilled. But the way they finished, people think, oh, they're done. They're not going to get there. But this is an intriguing game to me, so I'm kind of interested in that one. And you mentioned the Tampa game and Tom Brady, and it just seems on the surface that Tampa's too much for Philadelphia, and the line suggests that. But even though Tampa has a really great run defense, there's kind of been a little trend that I'm looking at where athletic quarterbacks have been able to get outside the pocket and put up some yards against them. And certainly Jalen Hurts fits that description. So it might be a little bit interesting to see how Tampa reacts to a running quarterback, and whether they get in a little trouble, at least versus the spread, maybe not in the game, versus that kind of motion offense.
I totally agree with that. Just from like a matchup perspective, that's what I was wondering about too. And I need to look at more trends and data on how the Bucks handle that, because Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are just the type of team that other NFL teams don't see very often. They
Yeah.
kind of remind me of the Ravens, the way that they
Yes.
built their
Yes.
offense, right? It's very run heavy, very quarterback sweeping out. So it's something that the Bucks saw this year, but it was pretty evident that the Eagles weren't trying to show too much of themselves in Week 18. So we'll see what Sirianni and that team has in store.
Mm-hmm.
One game that I'm looking at, it's going to be really hard to talk me off the Patriots at +4. I know it's at Buffalo, this rivalry, but I mean, you're giving me over a field goal with Belichick, and for what they did in the first game. Plus, the Bills won the last game. So there's it's almost like, part of me was wondering, Ron, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's like, did Belichick almost want them to lose in Miami, so they're not feeling that great about themselves heading into this game, so that they're really fired up? I don't know if coaches do that, but it wouldn't be a bad move, maybe. But I'm gonna do all the research I can to look at the Bills side and why there's probably plenty of value on that side as well. And that's just a good thing to do as a handicapper. If you have a strong initial gut feeling about something, try to play contrarian. And if the points start adding up on the other side, then maybe you start to question based on competing narratives. But the only other thing I would add is I always look at unders in the playoffs. Obviously, these are very matchup, relevant, right? So depending on the matchup, there could be plenty of overs, especially in the modern NFL. But in general, defenses don't feel the same pressure that a quarterback does, and then an offense does, and then a wide receiver does when they see that ball spinning towards them with the crowd going crazy. Defenses tend to really, kind of thrive off of that, right, and attack the quarterback and everything else. So I don't have any trends in front of me right now, unfortunately, but I will be looking at the unders and seeing if any of these totals seem a little bit off for me. I know in the Raiders and the Bengals game it's up there, and I imagine the 49ers and Cowboys it is too. Also some, team total unders maybe too, if there's a matchup advantage on top of that. Thank you for this conversation, Ron. Did you have anything to finish off with here?
I think the one last thing, if you want to touch on, if we're even ready to touch on, is got any favorites in terms of who you think might be the favorite to go to the Super Bowl? We haven't even talked about Green Bay. They've got a lot of challengers waiting that I weight about equally. The Rams, Tampa, diminished roster due to injuries, Dallas, and so on. I don't know who's going to face Green Bay, but in this era of just one team getting a playoff bye, it's a 2-game season for them. Do you have anybody who you think can knock off Green Bay?
I gotta say, Ron, I mean, I think that Green Bay could knock off Green Bay. First of all, we've seen that before. They
Yeah,
just kind of change in the playoffs. Where they don't have the same kind of confidence. But on
yeah,
paper, running through Lambeau Field to get to
yeah,
the Super Bowl, the Packers should have a significant advantage in most cases. Now their defense has been a little more inconsistent, but as long as Aaron Rodgers plays with the same poise and confidence that he's played all year, as long as him and Devontae stay healthy and
yeah.
they just keep that offense churning at Lambeau Field, this I would think this has to be the year that the Packers make the Super Bowl again, and maybe Aaron Rodgers gets another Super Bowl.
Yeah.
On the other end, I think it's a little more difficult. But I will say, as far as NFC team goes, a team I don't believe in, and maybe there's a little bias here, which you have to watch out for in
Yeah.
sports betting. But I don't believe in the Cowboys. I've seen too much inconsistency from them, especially in coaching, which we all sports bettors have called out. Mike McCarthy's coaching decisions from time to
Mhm.
time, and it's something to call out. Tony Pollard is a little banged up right now. Hopefully he plays for the Cowboys, but he's a difference maker. I mean, he's been running better than Zeke Elliott. So, but on the AFC side, Ron, I could see 3 or 4 different teams going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's that one's a little tough for me, and I don't think Tennessee is going to be as easy of an out as maybe some people think.
I think Buffalo's the best team, but they must get past New England, like you said. That's the roadblock. I think they're better than Kansas City. I think they're more equipped to handle Tennessee at Tennessee. I don't know if Kansas City is. So it's going to be really wild at that point. The team on the NFC side that I'm most curious about is how San Francisco does. And I don't know if I have a curiosity about Cincinnati or Pittsburgh or the Raiders. I think any one of them could win a game, but I think that's it. Their ceiling is one game. So you're really down to how far can New England go? How many games can Matt Jones play as a rookie? I mean, this is going to be game 17 or game 18, and then there's 19, and then there's 20. That's a lot of games for a guy first year in the league starting from day one. So I think it's pretty much, as far as getting to the Super Bowl, it might be a one-horse race with Green Bay unless Rodgers beats Rodgers, that kind of thing, like you said, and maybe a 3-horse toss-up in the AFC.
Yeah, I totally agree. And watch out for Brady. Here it comes again. Could be some good value on the Bucks to win the Super Bowl at this point, since they're not at the upper. I mean, they did earn the number 2 seed, but they're not. They're not the number 1 seed. They still have to have a pretty difficult path. And I will say too, the Patriots. As much, God, I respect them. I respect what Belichick does with that team on defense, but on the road to get there with an offense that can really sputter at times. I mean, we've seen the Patriots have to play from behind, and I don't know if they're capable of that. So if they go behind against a great offense like the Chiefs or like the Bills this weekend, I think it could be a quick night for the Patriots. So it's going to be a lot to figure out here, Ron. A lot exciting matchups though, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So it'll be great entertainment. Either way, we're gonna wrap this baby up because we're going on 30 minutes here. But Ron, is great talking the NFL playoffs with you. You can follow Ron at Ron A Sports on Twitter right now. You can follow me at Farley Bets or at Chris R. Farley 1 on Twitter. And please follow us at Sports Wager U on Twitter and TikTok, and check out the website as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and good luck in these crazy NFL playoffs.